Hello and welcome back to Race Streamer. It has been 7 months, pretty much, since I last uploaded any Club 100 videos. I have been competing since July, since we've come back anyways. I competed at Shennington when that was back around. I had to miss Clay Pigeon, I was at Buckmore, and I wasn't able to record either of those because there was an issue with the mounts on the cart, for those of you who didn't know. But I was pleased to be able to record this rather special one-off event, which was the 6 hours team endurance race. Now that's not 6 hours in total, that was 6 hours of joints racing between a team. But yeah, it was awesome to be able to go up to PFI New Grantham and compete at this bloody excellent circuit, if I'm being honest. It might be my new favourite kart circuit in England as it goes. It's such good fun, especially around when the bridge is, which you'll see in a minute. So this is lining up for the first race that I had of the day, which was supposed to be a half-hour race, except we had full start and then many rolling up laps while they were trying to sort a few issues in the pits with replacement karts. So this got reduced to a 20-minute race to begin with. It was completely dry conditions out on circuit, and during the warm-up laps I'd figured that I had quite a good kart on me. There was a little bit of difference in the karts, more noticeable on this circuit because the straights are longer, but yeah, I was feeling good for this, and thankfully I get quite a good start here as it goes, despite having got a really rubbish one on the first start, which was full started. So here we go, away from 5th, starting pretty high up the grid. It was random draw with the grids. I got chosen with my team to do the highest grid starts. Getting overtaken just by one person going into the first corner there, which is pretty good. And my priority during this race was to try and just hold position, basically. I wasn't realistically thinking that I was going to make my way up the field, per se. There were probably going to be quicker drivers coming through. But what I was pleasantly surprised about is actually I felt pretty competitive in this race, I've got to say. So because I caught up so much to the guy ahead in the braking zone of the first hairpin, I thought I'd lunge it into the second hairpin. Thankfully it stuck. I think he tried cutting me back, so you won't see him on the camera, but he's just on my inside but decides to back out of it. So I'm back up into 5th place, the place that I started, which is a decent start for the first lap. Now I'm going to struggle for knowing who every driver is in this race, just because I haven't got any sheet I can look at that's got driver names on it. It's just got the team names from the event. So I'm going to try and call out who I recognise as I go, and I'll be a bit better at knowing the names of drivers in the sprint events when I've actually got a name sheet in front of me. But anyway, pretty sure this is Stuart Lindley that's ahead of us. I'm going to get ridiculed if that's not his first name. Still holding 5th. There's a bit of shuffling going on around ahead. I think some of the what would be normal Class 1 sprint drivers are making their way through the field. Quite a robust move down the inside there. I didn't get a contact warning or a penalty for it, so it was deemed fair. And to be fair, I thought it was hard, but it was fair as well. Now closing up to the back of Ed Bars, last year's Club 100 champion. So any time that I'm driving behind him, I'm just quite thankful if I can stay with him. And at the moment, that is very much the case, which is a total rarity for me. So even though this was halfway through the second lap, I was already having a great time catching up to Ed here. But I think, yeah, he just gaps us a little bit through this corner. So still a few differences of just minimum speeds that I can improve on during corners, and him just getting better traction or holding better revs coming out of that corner there, so a short gap forming ahead. But I was just happy to still be in the tow of these guys. That was a really noticeable thing around PFI, in Club 100 in particular, was if you were, I guess, more than half a second back, you were really losing out in terms of the slipstreaming capability around this circuit, especially on the straight that follows this corner here. I found that I was able to catch up to the drivers ahead a lot. As you'll see, Ed goes to overtake whoever the guy is in 3rd place again. Can't remember his name, or don't think I've met him before. Ed gets through. Get a decent run on him. Think I'll just give him a nudge up behind, let him know that there's someone else still there. Not going to happen taking that drive around the outside. But what I do know is from testing the day before, So myself and Ryan from my team, we went up the day before to do some testing at the circuit, and I'm pretty sure I followed this guy around for a few laps, and we were on pretty similar pace, and I did recognise his helmet at this moment in the race. So I knew it wasn't going to be dead straightforward trying to overtake the guy ahead because we were on pretty similar pace, but the thought was that I would know that I could probably stick in his slipstream. Even if I slightly screwed up some corners, I'd probably catch up to him in a slipstream. And the priority for me was trying to lose as little time as possible if I was going to overtake him. So certainly no heroics if I could help it, just because I didn't want to lose ground to any drivers behind who I had in my head there would definitely be some quicker drivers behind coming up through the field. So skipping forwards a couple of laps, I've still held a pretty steady gap to that guy ahead. I've fallen back a little bit. I was really happy with my pace through this race as it goes, especially compared to other drivers who I feel like are damn quick. So, I mean, you can see Ed Bars' gaps to both of us a bit, but it's not a tremendous amount of time lost, I would say. But just starting to catch up to the guy ahead a little bit here. I could see that he was really ragged with his steering under braking there, so got the feeling that he was trying to push on almost a bit too hard and might start making more mistakes. So I thought I'd try and send it up the inside, which was a bit too heroic because it lost me quite a bit of time. Unfortunately, he got me back on the way out of the corner. Thought I'd try and cut back out of the chicane. Not quite enough of a run, so again I decided, you know what, I'll just stick behind him and I'll try and help the two of us along. Just the concertina ring effect meant that I was bunching up to the back of him during the slower corners, but if I was just bumping into his back bumper a little bit, it was just to try and provide him with a bit of a boost to help us both go forwards. And then I thought, you know what, I'm right on his bumper here. Can I take him at the first corner? Let's give it a go. Just realised it's not the first corner, but you know what I mean, first braking zone. Bit of a sloppy move, lost a bit of time because I clumped the inside curve, which you do not want to do. Nearly get overtaken around the outside, tried to give the driver on the outside room but didn't quite manage it. He kind of turned in on me slightly there, but no harm done. And then it all starts getting pretty busy because everyone behind is already caught up. So this is what I meant by not trying to be too heroic with overtakes, because you just lose so much time. So a couple of properly quick drivers have gone through. I noticed that's Owen Gemman. I followed him round in the test on the Saturday actually and picked up a few things from his driving, which helped me drive a bit quicker, frankly. But yeah, just like that, down from 4th place to 6th in the blink of an eye pretty much. And this was where things started to generally go backwards in the race for me. Not in a bad way, but I suppose in a way that I was kind of predicting might happen slightly. So again, it's the same priority really. Can I just stay in the toe of these guys, not run wide off the final corner if that's possible, and hopefully just keep my lap times as consistent as I can, and not lose ground further to any guys behind me. Thing is, with just slight differences between certain corner speeds, you know, it's racer's instincts when you see a gap and you think I'm going to go for it, but the problem with that is that you then just lose a little bit of time when you decide to have a half-hearted nibble at someone. It's just you've got to commit to overtakes like I did there. That was more like it. I squeezed the guy on the exit so he wasn't able to get me back, held a bit more of a defensive line and just opened up the corner for the second hairpin so I get more speed through it. So this is how I wanted to be racing, because then it was concise and clean overtakes and I wasn't losing too much time. Rolling on quite a few laps more, I'm still in the same position of 6th. I'm pretty sure I've still got the same guy behind me at this point, but he's not tried to have any goes at overtaking me in the last few laps, and I've just held a steady gap to the guys ahead. So I was quite happy at this point, just wasn't really thinking that I was going to catch the guys ahead, just trying to keep as consistent as possible. And then, yes, more inevitable things happened, getting overtaken down the inside by a quicker driver that's made his way up through the field a bit. Again, don't know his name, but it'll be good to find out at some point. And then there was the renewed priority of, okay, well, unless he makes a massive mistake, I'd rather just stay behind him as it goes, because I could see through even these few corners here. Yeah, he just gapped me a little bit there, but my pace wasn't horrendous compared to the guys ahead. So I just thought if we could somewhat work together still, then I wouldn't fall that much further back. Sounds like a really pessimistic way of thinking it through, but I was... It's the argument for pessimism versus realism. I was just trying to be realistic about my chances through the race. The team that I was on, we haven't casted a PFI before. This was only my second endurance event ever. Yeah, I know it's only a 20-minute race, so this one doesn't really qualify, but there was an hour race coming up later. So in my head, I was just trying to think of getting my eye in through this race, really, just staying out of trouble and trying to prep myself as best as possible without injuring myself for the 1 hour race later on. So same case again, couple of laps later, I've dropped off the back of the guys ahead a little bit, so I don't know, maybe I was lapping 2 or 3 tenths of laps lower than them, which I was quite happy with, to be fair, but it just meant that I was gradually dropping back. They weren't fighting too much. I mean, that was just quite a simple overtaking switch back there, so they didn't really hold each other up. But because I was gradually just falling back a bit, this still meant the drivers behind were catching up. So I'm pretty sure this is Pete O'Connor that's coming through on the inside. Now I saw him there, so I just pointed him through because I really didn't want to try and battle him, especially through that corner, because there wasn't really going to be that much of a chance for me to cut him back. And you can see him put his hand up there saying, let's push on ahead. Both of us lumping the curb there, which isn't going to help us push on ahead. I noticed that Pete had a really strong cart on him as it goes, so I did drop off the back of him quite quickly. But in my efforts to keep my pace up through this race, I feel like I might have cooked my front tyres somewhat, because I started finding that I was understeering quite dramatically through a lot of the corners on the circuit from about this point through to the end of the race, unfortunately. Fast forwarded a few laps again, and I bet you can't guess what's going to happen next. Well, I've dropped off the back of the guys ahead a little bit, and very bold move down the inside by a driver who I just did not expect to be there. Genuinely, I feel like I've got pretty good peripheral awareness. Now, that is Daz Teal. He's a quick driver I know of from Class 1 in the sprints. I haven't actually spoken to him before, but I'm aware of his presence, and his helmet's pretty recognisable, hence I actually recognised him. But yeah, he's already gapped me pretty quickly there, so I don't know exactly how far through the field he came up, but I could tell straight away, okay, I'm not at the same pace as this guy, I'll just settle back in and not even consider or entertain the possibility of overtaking him again. And then whizzing forwards to the end of that lap, onto the penultimate lap of the race. Now at this point I had a driver on my outside, which is why I didn't take the curb to the right, so that forced me on a defensive line, and unfortunately I absolutely clumped the curb again and then lose out to another driver. However, I'm not too sad to have lost out to this driver, so didn't know who he was at the time, but I caught wind that a couple of pro drivers outside of Club 100 had turned up to this event, and that driver ahead that's just overtaken me is Nick Foster, who is an Australian racing driver based in England. You should go and look up what he's raced before. He's pretty accomplished, to be fair to him. So yeah, when I found that out, I wasn't too sad to have been overtaken by him. However, it was slightly more significant with him because, bizarrely, and I don't know why they were, but they were running around in club class, Nick Foster and his teammate for the day, David Perrell. So yeah, I don't know why they were in clubbing, because they are seriously experienced racers. I know they've not done much Club 100. I think they might have done one event before. Yeah, I think they did an event with Steve Brown at the end of last year. But anyhow, so waffled on enough about that now. So we're on the final lap. For me, I can see that I've already lost out massively to the guys ahead. So I was pretty set on just trying to hold position. I think I'd had a look over my shoulder when I was on the pit straight, just knowing it was the final lap, and I could see a decent gap behind. So for me, it was just a case of keeping this last lap clean and coming home in whatever position I was in, which I didn't know at the time, but 10th wasn't too shabby. But then I could see the drivers fanning out ahead. So a little bell went off in my head and said, you know what, I might be able to catch them. So because they held each other up so much through the coming corners, I really did catch up to the back of them. So Nick Foster just overtaking a couple of drivers ahead there, or at least one driver in one corner and another driver in the next corner. Now the guy in the yellow and the blue helmet decided to have a go as well. I could see that the two drivers were rubbing, But because they touched and they kept in contact with each other, you just don't go forwards as quickly when you're stuck onto another car. So I mugged them. I was well happy about that move because I just bided my time for a few corners there and thought if I just wait patiently, I might get them, and I did. So that was cool. And yeah, I didn't finish where I started, down from 5th to 8th, but in the context of this race, where there were 37 karts out at the same time, and only lost 3 places on aggregate through the race, I was well happy with that. Right, so rolling on to the 1 hour endurance race, which as you can see is in wildly different conditions. Thankfully, when I tested on the Saturday, it absolutely larrups it with rain at the end of my session, so I had a brief opportunity to try out PFI in sodding wet conditions, so that would pay dividends for this race for sure. Now, every team had the option of either fielding one driver for this race and then running the race solo, or they could switch drivers partway through the race because everyone had a mandatory pit stop, at least just to apply some lube to the chain, which didn't take very long at all. So the way that I think most people saw it was that it was better to just have the one driver in the race because then your pit stop would definitely be as short as it could possibly be. I had drawn I'm going to start at the front straw again with this race. So we're starting in 8th, fully wetsuited up, wet boots, wet gloves, wet everything basically. And it's amazing how disgusting all of my equipment was after this. I'm not very much looking forward to cleaning it later this afternoon, because I still haven't, but thankfully not had a wet race since. Anyway, very slow run up to the grid. Sorry, run up to the line rather. But eventually getting going. Now, there were a few options for lines through these corners. You generally wanted to be off the dry line, so I decided to be pretty patient and just basically try and keep it on the island through this race. Now, the footage hasn't come out fantastically because I didn't have any Rain-X on the GoPro and it was covered in shite, basically, so you'll have to make do with all the raindrops on the camera, I'm afraid. But this was a pretty leery first lap as it goes. Now, it wasn't for contact, it was more just for, well, you'll see what happens in a moment. So, one driver with an engine fault, one driver taking it very cautiously down the straight, another driver braking in the right place, me completely overshooting, a small tidal wave. I'll have to get an action replay of that because I know Alistair Irvine was filming some shots with his drone, so I'll put that in here and we'll get back to the race in a sec. But yes, very differing lines around the hairpin, so getting overtaken by 3 drivers up the inside of hairpin 2, yet there was much more grip around the outside of the hairpin, so getting much better traction on the exit and taking a lot of them back. I was trying to give that driver a headspace, so I braked where I could, but I unfortunately understeered into him. I don't know where you stand on whether that deserves a contact warning or whether that was just a racing incident, but honestly, it's impossible to turn on the normal dry racing line when it's wet like this. I mean, Club 100 regulars will know, or anyone that drives slicks tyres in the wet. But what has happened is I started the first lap in 8th, and we've ended the first lap in 5th, which is absolutely marvellous. And looking for 4th potentially, because Mr. 4th place not getting a very good exit off the last corner. So we are up to 4th in the space of a lap and a little bit. And bearing in mind my priority at this point was basically just to keep my nose clean, not fall off, because I knew I was high up in positions anyway and it would be up to other people to potentially fall off. To gain 4 positions in a lap and a bit, yeah, that's not too shabby at all. Jumped forwards about half a lap here because, well, just trying not to produce a 1 hour edit like I did for my Alton Park race, because frankly I like my life and not spending all my life doing videos. Yeah, I've said it now. So, yeah, just still keeping things clean. There's quite a big gap to the drivers ahead. I think Mike Hopkins up there with a few other people. And just getting mugged down the inside by someone and Anwar Burrell Smith. At least I'm pretty sure it was him anyways. I was aware of Anwar as it goes through this race anyway, so when I saw him overtake me, again the thought was, okay, that's fine, I'll just try and follow him because I'll probably pick up a thing or two from his driving as it goes. Still trying to maintain a good speed rather than having a massive gap to him in front, because I mean it's assumption to make that he wasn't going to make any mistakes. I mean, conditions were extremely tricky, but I was kind of hoping that he would just be driving solidly and then I could learn from him. Thankfully, that was the case, and I picked up a few things watching him driving, which I didn't entirely execute into my own, but it definitely helps me improve on my pace a little bit in the early stages of the race. Whereas now we were running around somewhere around the 1 minute 35 to 1:37 mark, at least those of us at the front. Taking his offensive line into the third to last corner there, so that means that we had someone on the outside, unfortunately, which prevented me from bringing on the grippy part of the track. So unfortunately, let another driver slip past there, but nothing I could really do. I saw him point ahead, and I was quite happy to just bump draft him down the straight, to be honest, because I knew I wasn't going to be I wasn't going to be overtaking him anytime soon, but then Mike Hoppin's car must have just really cut out or something, so I almost ground to a halt on that apex in an attempt to give him space. Unfortunately, I still slid into him slightly, just because there is literally no grip on the dry line. But then I saw Mike Hoppin getting some good exits out of some of the corners, so I picked up a tip for the corner just heading off that bridge, that if you run onto the painted surface, actually there's a fair amount of grip out there, which is completely contradictory to what you would have thought. So you don't want to get on the curbs around here if I'm wet, but that one part there on the left far side to open up that right hand coming off the bridge, actually there was a decent amount of grip there, contrary to normal understanding. But yeah, so I knew that Mike Hoppin was having some issues. In my head I was thinking, well, he's got the pace on me in terms of his wet driving technique. I mean, you could see that, he's just gapped me again. But in my head I was thinking, well, if his cart's going to continue to play up, I'm going to have to overtake him, otherwise he's going to keep holding me up on the straights and gapping me on the corners, so it would be a total lose-lose for me as it goes. So this is jumping forwards about a lap. I could see that Mike's driving was getting a bit erratic. He was probably pretty frustrated with having not the greatest kart ever as it goes, so his driving was uncharacteristically not that refined. And seeing this unfolding, I thought that he's possibly going to make a little mistake soon, and that's exactly what happened. And because his kart just didn't have the poke down the straight, unfortunately for him, then it made it pretty easy for me to waltz on by as it goes. But what I quickly found out is Mike is very much a racer, so he wasn't willing to play the long game here. He definitely tried to come back at me straight away. There's a few differing wet lines around the first corner as well, so it's worth mentioning that just going around the outside works, but also cutting straight back to the inside where you would normally wash out on the dry line, that can work as well, but I personally preferred the outside line there. So you could see Mike Hoppin taking more of an inside line, overtaking me there. I'm surprised that it worked, to be fair, but I mean, that's the difference between myself, who's in my second year of racing, against Mike, who's been, well, he's been doing this longer than I have, that's for sure. But thankfully managing to overtake him again on that straight, because he was busy checking out his kart engine, trying to see what was up with it, and then I started to gap him a little bit. But the problem with my mindset at this point was, I was thinking, well, I really don't want Mike to overtake me again, because I'd love to have the clean road in front of me and just be able to crack on at my own pace, basically. So I decided I was going to really try and push for the next lap, put my braking points a little bit later if I could, try and eke out a bit more time. And unfortunately, I was just a little bit too late on the brakes going into the third turn there, and it just meant I got on my outside wheels on that white painted line on the outside of the circuit, and that's your typical the paint doesn't give you grip moment. So I just lost out again, unfortunately, with a massive gap ahead to Mike Hoppin now, and that is precisely how it stayed for the next lap in a little bit. I think we've got a quicker driver coming up behind us now, so my pace was decent as it goes in the wet, and I wasn't falling off anywhere, so I hadn't been a pleb like I have been in the past in the wet, but unfortunately getting overtaken, I think that is by Costa. I didn't know who that was at the time, but I sure know about him now, the so-called Greek god of speed. So yeah, I'm not too sad about knowing now that it was him that I was being overtaken by, because he has mucho experience in Club 100s, and he's regarded as a very quick driver. So, I mean, even at this point, I realised that was for position. So, again, I was thinking, well, if I can follow them, that's fine with me. I knew I hadn't lost that many positions overall. I was back down to 8th, but so that's the same place that I started in anyway, so that was fine with me by this point. So I've jumped forwards quite a few laps. Costa basically left me behind and then decided to pit about a couple of laps later, so I then had a bit of clean running in front, and then I caught up to Mike Hoppin again because unfortunately he was just losing time out of all of the slower corners. I think his kart just wasn't picking up as well. He managed to suss his outright straight line issue in terms of speed, but I was just catching him again, and it wasn't for a fact of his driving ability by any means, it was just his kart. I'm pretty sure that he switched karts actually when he pitted, so yeah, I don't think I saw him again after this, but I knew that I was going to get held up by him again to an extent, so I thought, you know what, I'll pit right now. And that was amazingly close on the braking limit there, so I hadn't actually been able to test the braking in the wet before, and it was in my best interest to try and get through the pits relatively quickly. We'd been asked to not rush through the pits like it would be at racing speed and just go at I think in JB's words was a jogging pace, so I decided to stick to that rule just to avoid any sense of penalty. A bit slow to react in the pits as it goes. When I heard the word go, I was just surprised that it took them that little amount of time to apply the chain loop, but I suppose, well, yeah, the more you know. So coming back out of the pits, I've dropped a couple of places to 9th. I think that means that Costa is still ahead on the road as it goes, and Mike Hopkins certainly still was. So at this point, my bearings had completely left me in terms of where I was position-wise. There's a big scoreboard up to the left here, but because it's not really in your line of sight, then you can't properly catch it when you're driving around, especially in these conditions. I was just trying to concentrate on not falling off the circuit, basically. So if you can see by the amount of dirt on the camera, the rain had stopped, the circuit was starting to dry, but it was in a greasy state at the moment, which is why my camera's got loads of crudge on it, and it's not been washed off. Getting overtaken by Peter again. I was aware of him from the first race in terms of what his pace capability was, so from that point of view, I didn't actually know if it was full position or whether he had been way out in front of that at this point. Should have probably clocked that it was full position, because the way I've been driving, it was unlikely that I was going to be 15 laps into the race, even though they are very long laps in terms of lap time. It still wasn't going to be the case that I was going to laps. I suppose the only way that would have been a scenario is if I thought myself lost so much more time. And as it goes, I then settled into the race in 10th place. I had to overtake a few back markers at some points, but it was a pretty lonely 20 minutes, to be honest with you. So you can see a few rain spots on the camera. I think it tried to have a bit of a rain again, but on the whole, the circuit was now starting to develop a little bit of a dry line. And I say a little bit, like you can see it just appearing there. So priority was trying to hook the outside tyres onto that dry line, and that was what was giving me the most grip that I could get. And we have found Costa again. So Costa did indeed stay out in front of me throughout the pit stop phase. So I have to admit, I was surprised that I caught up to him, but actually, when I looked back at my lap times versus a lot of others, during the phase where the track was in a drying process, I actually set 2 fastest laps as it goes, which is the first time I've ever set the fastest lap in any Club 100 race, I think, and I did it twice in this race. So for some reason, I managed to find grip where other people weren't, so I'll see if I can talk through my methods somewhat. You're probably just going to sit here thinking, oh, shut up, you pleb, but I'll see if I can talk you through what I was doing. So we were asked to try and keep 2 wheels inside the painted white line on hairpin 1 and hairpin 2, so I was trying my best to do that, but ultimately, if you went all 4 wheels outside of the white line, there was hella more grip out there. in the wet conditions, so it was certainly quicker for traction off the corner going out that wide. Now, Costa being held up by a back marker there, which was rather nifty, so I managed to get past him without any real bother there. I'll talk through the wet line for these corners on the next lap, but it is worth mentioning that on the testing day, myself and Ryan, who was on my team, we sat down and watched Nicky Richardson's track guide, and that was highly insightful for especially the wet line stuff, so I felt like I already kind of knew what I was supposed to do before I actually started testing on Saturday. Unfortunately, getting held up by a back marker here, and in my efforts to stay clean and not punt into him, because he did go to take quite an aggressive line, I'm not sure if you saw me, Costa slips back by. So, well, I suppose that's 1-1 in that case, because he got held up by a back marker and overtook him, and then vice versa happened to me. So, sod's law, but at least I was managing to keep it clean and not... Oh no, I was about to say not smash into back markers. Okay, in my defence, I tried to show him I was there, and I knew it was going to be difficult to overtake on the inside because it's just so treacherous offline, but I just didn't want, I don't want to get held up by back markers because I knew my race was going pretty well at this point. I just had a good feeling about it anyway. But yeah, still doing better at anticipating different braking points of certain other drivers than I did in my last endurance race, which was in February at Buckhorn Park, where I managed to receive a black flag for absolutely sending someone. Not a whole lot to report from the last 6 laps, just overtook a few more back markers on the way, but otherwise it was mostly clean running. Costa managed to escape for a little bit, but I've managed to reel him back in a bit now because he must have lost a bit of time when he was overtaking these 2 back markers that I'm coming up to at the moment. Now, that was the only time in the race that I properly misjudged a braking point versus the driver ahead. I still braked in the same place, to be fair to myself, but the guy had braked so early, it just really caught me off guard. So thankfully I managed to run wide and mostly dissipate the speed and not whack into the back of him. But then Costa getting held up by another back marker again in the same place, and I was in a bit of a tricky situation there because I had to stay on the inside because Costa was still to the outside of me, and honestly I didn't want to let Costa back through, but equally I didn't want to smash into the guy ahead. Well, guess what happened? I was on the wet, so I just understeered into him. It's just... it's really difficult to know what to do in that situation, to be honest. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts collectively on what you think the best approach should be. I mean, ultimately, clean driving, in my head, is better than dirty driving, but potentially more opportunistic driving. I'd rather be clean, but it's really hard in the wet, to be honest. I hope you can all sympathise with me. And in the process of talking about that, we've seen myself get overtaken for position by... I honestly have no idea. I'm so lost at this point, to be honest. Like I said, I will know people's names when I do the next sprint vlog. I promise you that. But I could already see just from the few corners where I was following him here, he just had the legs on me, to be fair. I was still confident in the drying lines that weren't completely on the normal dry line that I was taking, and as much as I was trying to watch what the guy ahead was doing to take a bit of influence, see if I could gain more lap time, I didn't want to be like, oh great, I'll do it that way, and then end up stuffing it. I mean, even then I tried to take a slightly tighter line to the apex, but the grip still wasn't quite there yet, so that's why it washed me out a little bit wider. So yeah, he's already gapped me hugely, so at this point I just went back to, okay, I'm just going to drive to where I feel like the limit is, and then hopefully I'm not going to fall off from trying to chase someone that I'm not actually capable of chasing. So arriving on the penultimate lap of the race, it's worth mentioning that I'm still in the same position of 10th, I've still got the same driver ahead, still got Costa behind me for about 1 more second. Unfortunately he slips by on the inside here. Now I don't think I did anything wrong into the 3rd turn, he just did something better than I did. Now I was kind of aware at this point, considering our pace was so similar, I figured that this battle was for position. So I figured actually I should probably get a wiggle on. I'm not going to try and follow this guy, I'll try and get him back. Unfortunately, I went for the inside line again. I didn't really know what else to do, to be fair, to try and overtake him there, so maybe I should have just stayed behind, but it meant that I washed out really wide, and Costa was smart to it, just gave me the room to being umpty, and then he overtook me pretty swiftly again afterwards. Now, if you saw a guy spun out on the inside there, that was the race leader, Phil Ingram. There was a bit of controversy surrounding that because he just got absolutely punted by someone. Considering that's on the penultimate lap, that, yeah, sucks to be him. But anyway, so on to the final lap of the race. There's a bit of a gap between Costa and I, but I hadn't given up on the thought of possibly being able to overtake him because it wasn't still 100% dry line. Then the speed difference between Costa and I in various corners was quite wildly different. So as much as he was gapping me in this part of the lap, I wasn't giving up hope for potentially being able to catch him around the slower corners because I was feeling pretty happy with how I was being able to find traction out of these. Especially my braking point there was a fair bit later than Costas', so I've managed to gain a little bit back on him. Being relatively careful into the second hairpin, I wasn't too confident on the brakes there, but holding the same gap to him anyways. Now I don't know why he chose to do this, but Costa just went a bit deep to this turn, got in the wet, and it just really compromised him coming out, so I managed to overtake him, and that's where I held my position to the end of the race, which is great. So I had no idea where I was position-wise at this point, other than the fact that I knew that I'd just overtaken the guy from position on the final lap, so I was pretty happy about that. But it turned out that it was a pretty crucial move actually, because there were a few drivers ahead on the road that received penalties, so it meant the net result was that I started 8th and I finished 6th, which is bloody excellent. It's not the highest I've ever finished in a Club 100 race, but when I consider how many seriously class drivers there were in this race, it would be like fielding all of the Class 1s and all of the Class 2s and 3s together on a sprint event by having the 37 karts out on circuit. So I was seriously happy when I got out of the karts to find out that I'd come home after penalties had been applied in 6th. So yeah, really enjoyed this event. I've got to say big thanks to Club 100 for organising it and for their continued efforts through a somewhat abnormal season, it has to be said, but I was super thrilled that this event was still able to run, and I had a really good time with my team. I think the structure of the event, having one semi-sprint race in the morning that was supposed to be half an hour in length and then having an hour race in the afternoon, was good. So I'd definitely go for that sort of thing again, whether that be held at the Spa kart circuit sometime in the future, or whether it's a PFI again. But if you haven't karted at PFI and you ever get the opportunity to, I would highly recommend it. It's not the most challenging circuit in the sense of there's not that much undulation, there's not that many bumps, it's such a perfect track surface, but it's just got so many different corner types, it's properly fun. So thank you for watching if you've got this far. I will be putting up videos from the sprints at Bayford Meadows on Sunday this week, which is the 4th of October, while I will be racing in the 24 hours at Buckmore. So that will go up on Sunday. I'll have the sprints from Lid, which happened a couple of weeks ago now. That will be up sometime next week. And then I'll have to follow it up with the massive task of editing all of the Buckmore 24 hour. But yeah, if you're enjoying this stuff, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you guys again soon.